Big fucking mug. Hello everyone, welcome to the next instalment of the Barrel Vision Spotlight series. After not so careful consideration, and by which I mean just consulting with Tyler, he was very quick to establish what he thought was best. I'm doing the Gunner overview spotlight before I do something like the Warthog or the Warthog clean overclocks. I decided on a format of sets of 4, and for now it'll be one of each class in each set of 4 over the course of a fortnight, starting on Sunday and ending on a Wednesday. So that's how it'll be from here on out. I don't know how things are going to be once I get past the classes themselves, but it's a bloody long way off, so I'm not too worried. Anyway, today is about Gunner, who is the almost the opposite actually to the quintessential dwarf, or the quintessential class I should say, because he's in fact the least popular. But from what I've observed and my general impression, and something that me and Tyler agree on, is that he's most people's second favourite, in fact probably everyone's second favourite, which I don't think is entirely untrue. And that's probably because he can do just about everything, but he doesn't feel particularly specialised. As in, not inherently specialised, but he can be specialised for just about anything. So, given that it's the first thing that I have written down here, I suppose I should talk about range. Given that I was very, very adamant that Engineer was a medium range class, I was originally going to put Gunner down as long range, which is more appropriately attributed to Scout. In my opinion, Gunner is all ranges on all of his weapons, in fact. Obviously some are more suited for others. I think all of his secondaries are a bit more suited to longer range, or at least what I have observed is that the second generation of his weapons, that being the Thunderhead and the Burt, are more mid-range than the other 2 generations, which are both very long range in my opinion. And I think that the best way to do this is actually on a weapon by weapon basis. So if I were to show off a little bit, look at that. Also, you might notice the music, it's a royalty free playlist, obviously. I don't know exactly what's going to come on, but it's jazz, which I thought is ironically appropriate for Gunner, I think, because of how calm it is. Anyway, I said I should discuss range on a weapon by weapon basis. So the minigun is probably the most reliable out of all of them, I would say, when it comes to range. And you could make an argument for the Hurricane, and I will make that argument, even though I disagree with it. The minigun can be used at all ranges quite effectively, but I'd say short range is its greatest weakness, which isn't the case for the other 2. The minigun is probably best at mid-range because, well, yes, it is very accurate. It's not quite as accurate as something like the Shard Diffractor, and of course it starts on lower accuracy, as in much lower accuracy than what it can achieve. We hold down the trigger for a second or 2. Right, it's getting a little bit hot, so I decided to take off my jacket. You're welcome. So yes, the minigun is mostly mid-range. It can be used both at short and long range, but I'd say mid-range is where it shines, and the Thunderhead, in that sense, is the short-range king, I think, of Gunner. Now, of course, the Hurricane does have a salvo module, which is essentially a rocket shotgun, but it's not built into the Hurricane itself. It's one of its best overclocks, I will grant, but it's not its nature. In fact, it goes against its nature to achieve that effect. The Thunderhead is the close to mid-range one, as in it's very difficult to use at long range, and once again there are exceptions. There's always exceptions, which is something I want to hammer in. There's exceptions to almost all of this stuff. I just thought I should quieten the music quickly. It seemed a little bit too loud to me. Anyway, talking about the Thunderhead, which yes, if you use the Thunderhead you'll know that it's not very effective at long range. Obviously something like Neurotoxin Payload is effective at every range, although arguably not short range, but Thunderhead, I think, especially its 3 tier 5 upgrades, which will be its own video eventually, really hammer this in, giving you increased damage or defense specifically the defense and the fear, to me are an indication of short range use. And that's because you can more consistently hit things directly at short range, and at short range enemies are more likely to be bunched together, making the explosive aspect much more effective as well. And at medium range, it's not much worse, I'd say. But short range is where it shines. And then you have the Hurricane, which should be the one that shines at long range, but kind of doesn't. It's if you're prepared to dedicate yourself to a shot, then you will hit something at long range if you can keep your crosshairs on it. And that's the issue, frankly. Rockets are never quite fast enough, frankly. Or they're either too slow or actually too fast, like with jet fuel homebrew, which is actually quite difficult to use at very long range. But the Hurricane, by its nature, should be the long range one. I would put it down more so as just the generalist one. The Hurricane's probably the most generalist out of the three, given that I am a bit sour, a bit down on its default state, and really consider it to be its uses to come in the form of its more extreme overclocks, pushing in the three different directions, that being single target damage, crowd clearing, and generalist use, which is Salvo module, if you hadn't guessed. So the Hurricane, when it comes to range, is a bit dubious, I'd say. But really the point I'm making here about range is that Gunner can fit any combat role, which is actually something I have written down, and that applies to ranges, of course. You can go for extreme, precise single target damage, which makes you a high priority target killer, which is usually Scout's role. You can spec massively into AoE with all three of these. If you use Burning Hell on the minigun, that's quite effective AoE. And suddenly you are taking Driller's role or Engineer's role as crowd clearers. Gunner is also by default quite the, I wouldn't say tank, but support also makes him sound too frail. There isn't really a good word for it, but he's very good at keeping the team alive, whether it be through his weapons or his equipment. Maybe not the zipline, but the shield is really what is emblematic of this. The shield is to keep you and your teammates safe while you lay down the law, as it were, with your weapons. Gunner, to me, really is the most defensive, which sounds a bit odd, I suppose, when you consider Engineer's nature, which I talked about in the last video, where he is, well, I didn't use the word defensive, but he's all about pre-planning and controlling the flow of combat to stop enemies from getting to you. Gunner isn't necessarily about stopping enemies from getting to you, he's just stopping that from being a problem, specifically. He's actually almost the anti-engineer in that sense, and that's why I always pair the two together, because they're the most, while they do function fairly differently, they are the most about just raw firepower, raw explosive damage or direct damage than Scout or Driller. I'm going to briefly touch on the secondaries, because there's definitely more to talk about than there would have been if they were all similar, but even more so than Driller, Gunner secondaries are very much so meant to be sidearms. In fact, they are all categorised as pistols, as you can see here. Well, of course, the Bulldog is a revolver, but a revolver is a type of pistol. Even the coil gun, however, is categorised as a pistol. Now, I do think the coil gun goes a bit above and beyond what you might expect based on the Bulldog and the Bird. But the way that they all feel quite light. Yes, all of Gunner's secondaries feel quite light and not particularly flexible, in my opinion, which is an issue that really comes into play with the Burt, because it really can't be specialised to do anything other than decent single target DPS. I'd say it probably is the generalist out of the three though, with the coil gun being the wave clearer, the crowd clearer, and Bulldog being the single target heavy hitter. Although both of those weapons can have their roles reversed if you so choose. I'd say the coil gun is the most flexible out of even those two options, most certainly out of the three. So that's a very generalised overview of the secondaries. But what about his equipment? Well, I discussed the shield generator, but what about the zipline launcher? Well, I don't really have I have things I could say about the Zipline launcher, but very little that I want to say, because I'd rather actually just talk about Gunner's identity as a class. In this sense, I think he's actually the most unique out of the four, because obviously I talked about the fact that Engineer, I think, is equally identified by his support tool as he is by his reversal tool, but at the same time, he's defined by his tools, as is Driller, who is massively defined by the drills, and so is Scout, who I think is defined somewhat by both of his tools, being the flare gun and the grappling hook. Gunner, everyone knows he has a shield generator, but that's not an archetype, that's not a stereotype of gunners, I believe, or gunners or heavy classes in shooter games, in class-based shooters. But obviously in the Deep Rock community, everyone knows that Gunner has a shield, but it's not really his identity. And the Zipline launcher most certainly is not either. It's quite a clunky, unwieldy, unimpressive traversal tool, frankly. I think it has a lot of hidden luster, a lot of hidden usefulness that people gloss over. I think it's a lot better than people think, and it's a lot more appropriate than people think for someone who has so much more firepower than the other classes. And that's really the point I'm getting at here. Gunner's identity, who is Gunner? Well, he is the Gunner. His identity is his guns, not his tools, not even his grenades, necessarily. Gunner is defined by the fact that he has guns. He has big guns and he has small guns. There's no overlap. His secondaries are small guns, his primaries are big guns, but they are guns. Lots of firepower, lots of explosions, lots of bullets, lots of both, lots of dead bugs. That's really Gunner's motif. Obviously Driller has quite a destructive identity surrounding him, but it really is Gunner's mantra, almost, would you say, destruction, which I suppose then we can talk about the grenades, but the sticky grenade is slightly archaic. It's not a far cry from the HE grenade that Driller has, which is just the leftover frag grenade which Engineer, Driller and Gunner had before new grenades were added, and of course new grenades will be added soon in Season 3. But yeah, sticky grenade, slightly archaic, not great really at any specific thing, mainly just turning Praetorians around so you can shoot them with the revolver or the minigun, which is an interesting use, but definitely a tangible one, but very niche, certainly. The Incendiary Grenade is, in my opinion, the best that he has to offer. Lots of coverage, just fire, big roaring fire. It's one of the most visually striking grenades in the game. The caster grenade is just a big crowd clearer. It's effective, but also quite dangerous to yourself and your teammates. Not so much yourself, given that Gunner's armour, his unique armour rig mod provides him with a 50% explosive damage resistance, which is, yes, Engineers is very valuable when it comes to resisting damage from acid splitters, damage over time, and Praetorian spray, and just the fungus box in general. I would say that Gunner's unique armour rig mod is the most universally effective. 50% explosion resistance, 50% explosion resistance to your own explosions, your teammates' explosions, glyphid exploders, a lot of the attacks by dreadnoughts and the caretaker, lots of different robots. It's all over the place. It's by far the most universally useful one, except, I will say, in saying that, I did sort of forget Scouts. It's a 50% full damage reduction. It might be less than 50%, but it's of course extremely useful for Scout. But, Scout needs that. Gunner doesn't need 50% explosive resistance. It's just a massive, very appreciable bonus. Anyway, so now that we've had a brief overview of all of his equipment and his identity, I'd very quickly like to talk about Gunner when it comes to skill, and how he's probably the least demanding class to play in the game. In fact, I think that goes without saying, which is perhaps why he is quite unengaging to some people. But to me, it's what makes him so engaging, because it's very easy to be good with Gunner, but in my opinion, what that creates is actually a very big disparity, where there's sort of two groups of Gunner players, as opposed to the many different types of other class players you can have. There's much more variety in different types of players, the different levels of skill. But with Gunner, it's either good, because Gunner's just very easy to play, or it's spectacular, which is what I strive to be. I don't know if I could call myself that, but I can't call myself a good player. I wouldn't call myself spectacular. But it's something that very much so draws me to Gunner, is his simplicity as a class, his simplicity of his equipment, and that it doesn't go very deep. There's very few there's actually only really one combo build, and it's the fire build that I'm sure you're all familiar with. We'll talk about it at some point. I might make, that's another thing, build spotlights could be a thing as well. I've got a little bit too many ideas perhaps for there to be only 2 of these a week. I might end up doing more, but for now, 2 spotlights per week. But yeah, Gunner in general is probably the easiest class to play, and not the hardest class to master, but there's the biggest difference in someone who started playing Gunner and someone who has mastered Gunner. And it's such a big difference because I don't think there's really an in-between. You either get good with him because he's so easy to play, or you're an absolute master and you destroy everything, because Gunner can almost do that anyway. So if you're amazing with Gunner, you're going to create some amazing results in game, and that's just who he is. Now, before I go, I want to very, very briefly touch on the idea of Gunner as a pseudo healer, which is really something that is enforced by his shield and not really much else. But it's definitely a thing in that Gunner will be the one, especially in a boss fight, he'll be the one reviving pretty much all the time, and usually, hopefully, the one who doesn't go down. Gunners probably, I would actually estimate that Gunners have the least overall downs out of any class. And that being said, I am running a bit thin on things to say about Gunner in a very general way. Obviously, there's lots of things I could say about this individual piece of equipment, but without really getting into it, I am running dry. So I'm going to wrap this up now. And speaking of running dry, my mouth's getting a little bit dry. I can't talk on my own, certainly, for a very long period of time, which I don't think is too unfamiliar to most people. I think probably understand. Like I said, big mug. Also, I'm a funny guy, right? What's this? Hey, there's lots of me. Anyway, so that was the Baron Vision Spotlight on Gunner. The next 2 will of course be Driller and then Scout, and after that we'll really get into things a bit more in depth about more specific things. It'll be the Warthog, then the Minigun, then the Flamethrower, and the GK2, and you can see where it goes from there. So I think you should be a bit look forward more to that. I'm looking more forward to that than just these basic class overviews, but I want to get them out of the way just so I can get my thoughts out. Speaking of which, I guess I should get to opinion. My opinion, because this isn't a class review, but these videos are really a way for me to get my thoughts out on specific things. So I mentioned that I think that Gunner is like the second most picked, or everyone's second favourite basically, but no one's number 1 favourite, which is kind of true for me. Recently I would say Gunner has been my favourite more than Engineer, although Engineer has always been my main. I really love playing Gunner. I think he's an absolute blast to play, no pun intended, and I really can't get enough of him. I would consider him actually not my second main, but my joint main with Engineer. I think they're joint. Although I have promoted my Engineer more, I think I like him just as much, and sometimes I find myself liking Gunner more. And with that, I'm going to stop pretending like I have anything else to say. So, although I'm finding it a bit weird looking at all these versions of myself, and I apologise for that. I thought it was funny. Probably not that funny. Let's bring Gunner. That's not what I was meant to bring back. You can look at that if you want, but There he is, Gunner. So I'm over 20 minutes actually, which I think technically makes this longer than the Engineer one. So with that being said, what's a Gunner quote? I think I can look without mucking up the recording. Actually, I can pause it. What's this?